Visitors, my name is Steve Carrolley, club president, and I'd like to welcome you all to the third meeting of the 48th year of the Dublin Worthington Rotary Club. Today's invocation and pledge of allegiance will be offered by the one and only Al Wu.
I'm here. Let's pray. Father, allow us to make our homes places of relaxation, joy, love, peace, and safety. May we be generous and considerate in helping others enjoy the blessings of this summer season. We ask that you guide our steps and strengthen our hearts during these summer months of vacation, granting us refreshment in mind and body. Finally, we ask that you allow us to constantly strive to make a difference in the lives of our loved ones, community, and Rotary family. In your name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I guess I wasn't ready to pledge flag for the Zoom people, so sorry about that, Zoom people. Right, introducing visiting Rotarians and guests, we have Teresa.
So, Ratna, you have a guest? Want to introduce? My husband, Bala. He has been in the Rotary ages ago, just like I was when we were on the short trip to India. I continued on in Dubai, he didn't, but now he wants to join me.
Excellent. And I have good authority that his application is in, and we may be taking action on that tomorrow at the board meeting.
Yes, I'm Cheryl Roller. Cheryl is the Columbus president of the Columbus chapter of League of Women Voters. Yes, you did. And her husband, he's a good guy, no. He was a former IT genius with Safe Auto. So we're going to get lunch with you, right?
Welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No, it's
I think we're ready for our sergeant. Get us whipped up into a frenzy
Yeah.
on this tired day.
Hello, everyone, and the people in Zoom land. Hello? Hello? Anybody here? Oh, yeah, hey. Anybody got happy dollars today? Let's start with that.
My happy dollars, Chip Shooter is back safely from Mongolia, and I'm sure has a lot of adventures to share with us.
And it's good being happy about. Anybody else? Tim?
Well, I'm pretty happy to be here with you guys.
I think we all should be happy that Mr. Butterfield is one. Hey, hi, Don.
That's why I'm here to wish Charlie congratulations.
Anybody else? Who else is happy today? Somebody's not to be happy. Can't be dragging money out of people's pockets. All right, in that case, happy National Hot Dog Day, everybody. You should all have hot dogs for dinner since you're having them for lunch. And that said, sorry? Oh, the bucket.
Carrying the bucket.
You don't have a bucket. Oh, there it is. You can carry it. Okay. It's been a while. I've been off the schedule. So, you know, my favorite thing, if you don't happen to be wearing that thing that we gave you when you joined the club or your name badge, please handy up a buck and give it to Mr. Shear. We'd appreciate that. Our last big deal was the 4th of July. Can I see who in this room helped with that? Either by donating money, going to the grounds, doing something beforehand or after? Please, before we test, raise your hand if you assisted with that. And if you are not raising your hand, kindly share $1 with Mr. Shear. I know that our president Steve is working really hard to get our committees filled up. So everybody on a committee, raise your hand. If you're on a committee of any sort, please throw your hand up in the air. And if you're not raising your hand, I give Mr. Shear $1. And finally, what a boring day this has turned out to be. Who is here on the, for the installation banquet, dinner, rah-rah, whatever we call that thing? Please go ahead and raise your hand. And if you weren't here, go ahead and add $1 to the little pot that we've accumulated. And with that, I will ask, what kind of music do balloons hate? What genre of music do balloons hate? Pop. Pop, of course. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. And with that, I will, I'll be first to add, if you have an announcement, please make your way to the podium, and I'll make a couple myself while we're waiting. First of all, Bill Shantz Memorial Golf Outing with the Powell Chamber is going to be on Tuesday, September 13th. If you're able to golf in that, mark your calendar. It's going to be a noon shotgun and Kinsale, and it's $150 a person or $500 for a foursome. So if you're interested in that, get yourselves together. Somebody sign up a foursome and save $25 a piece. Yes, sir.
What do you do with all the money?
Who?
You.
Me? I have no money. The Powell Chamber takes the money, and the proceeds go to the Melanoma Foundation, Melanoma Education Foundation, which is outside of Massachusetts.
I'm just checking.
Yes, sir. Thanks for checking. And then finally, some of you may know that I've taken over as the chair of our foundation, which I'm super excited about. I think our foundation is awesome. And one of the things that I want to do on a more regular basis is tell you what our foundation is doing with that money that we're donating to them every other quarter with our bill. The last thing that we had was in May, where a speech language pathologist in the Dublin City School District reached out to us. This was us, by the way, with Dublin Bridges, about a family that has 2 special needs children. One of the children uses a speech generating device to help them express themselves and to engage in the curriculum. The parents' insurance covers most of the cost of this device, but they must pay the $1,499 out of pocket. Parents both work different shifts, AM and PM, to help cover childcare because they have limited waiver services for the kids. This is a great family who works very hard to do what is best for their children. With high deductibles, they're unable to afford the additional support that they need for them. With that, our foundation gave the $1,499 so that this young man could, I guess I wishes to have this device. So thank you, everybody, for making those contributions. Please don't hesitate to make more. And if you have other ideas that we as a foundation can do to maybe raise some money, I certainly love to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. You did such a good job with that segue. I wonder if you just want me to do it again for the rest of the meeting.
You got it. You did such a good job. How could I possibly get that?
Any other announcements? Okay, then tomorrow we have a board meeting, 7:30 a.m. It's on Zoom as a regular board member, club member. If you're interested in hopping on and watching, let me know. Send you the link. Christy, did you have an announcement? All right, while she's come up here, we are having a meeting to debrief about the family picnic. It's next Thursday, the 28th, 5:30 to 7:30 at our old meeting space, which is my office. That kind of conference room, you guys remember? Sure. There will be food. So if you have something to say about the family picnic, in terms of anything, timing, events, food, all the above, we're going to talk about it, strategize for next year. Okay.
It's not leftover hot dogs or anything. It should be.
Yeah, it's old bags of chips.
All that.
Old bags of chips.
All right, does everyone here know what buddy box is?
Yes.
Anyone not? So community service has organized a buddy box packing event. That'll be our next community service project. Thursday, August 18th from 6 to 7, so just 1 hour of your time. We would like 25 volunteers, so we actually can't have more than 25 at this event. It can be you and a friend, you and a spouse. I think that's it. Thursday, August 18th, 6 to 7.
It's at their place?
It will be at the Family Mentor Foundation, which is at 460 Schrock Road. And I'm going to pass around the sign-up sheet here at today's meeting. We'll continue to pass it around each week until it's full. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristen. I think that's it for announcements. So I think we're ready for our program. Mr. Farmer, if you would set us up.
It's my pleasure to introduce today Jim Miller, who is the Executive Director of the Ohio League of Women Voters. Jim was raised in a small town in Ohio. She has over 20 years' experience working with diverse communities to promote social justice and civic action through positions with Wellness, Recreation, and Parks, the Martin Luther King Arts Complex, the Ohio State University, and Lowell Gallery. She earned her master's in Arts Policy, Education, and Administration program at the John Glenn School of Public Affairs at Ohio State. She holds bachelor's degrees in vocal music and history and ethnic studies from Capital University. She's also a graduate of the U.S. Department of Energy NREL Leadership Academy. Currently, she serves on the boards of the Ohio Debate Commission, the Ohio History Connection, and Kids Voting Ohio. Inspiring others to participate in civic engagement is her deepest passion. But more importantly than all of that, she is the mother of a young daughter, excuse me. And in her spare time, she's a jazz singer. So please help me welcome Jim Miller.
And. All right, good. Okay.
Well, thanks. I assume we have some people at home, right?
Yep.
So hello to those at home as well. Thank you, Jim, for inviting me. I always love Rotary clubs. Who's heard of the League of Women Voters before? So most everybody. And if you do have questions about what we do locally, Cheryl Roller, when you raise your hand, is here and she can talk to you about what we do locally. There's a lot of alignment, I think, with Rotary and League in terms of caring about the community, promoting civic dialogue, service, community service, membership, really volunteer led. So the League of Women Voters is actually 100 years old, and we do all kinds of things from work with Girl Scouts to register. We're probably the largest volunteer-led voter registration organization in the state. We do a lot of tabling, we do a lot of public talks. And just so you know how we started, we actually were formerly the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association, which was formed after the Civil War. There were a lot of local suffrage organizations, little towns throughout Ohio, and there was a National Suffrage Association. The Ohio Women's Suffrage Association was trying to get the rights for Ohio women to vote. And in 1920, as it appeared that the 19th Amendment was going to pass, we became the League. There were 14 organizations that voted to form us. So that included organizations of nurses, businesswomen, lawyers, teachers, the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, DAR, the Council on Jewish Women, just a wide range. And the idea would be to help women know the where, the what, the how to vote, since it was going to be their first time, but also to demystify how women could participate in government as advocates. So in 1920, let's keep in mind that women could not refuse a marriage, they could not own property, there was a lot of things like that. So it was twofold. I'm here to talk about gerrymandering, and we are one of the leaders of fair districts. We are the leading nonpartisan redistricting advocates and experts. I say nonpartisan and I mean it. I don't mean bipartisan, I mean nonpartisan. So bipartisan would be when you have Republicans and Democrats, maybe independents or others working together. Nonpartisan means that we leave all of our party proclivities at the door, and we've actually been fighting partisan gerrymandering, this idea of rigging legislative maps here in Ohio when it was done by Democrats and now that it's been done by members of the Republican Party. We also have had lawsuits nationally and here in Ohio fighting rigged maps both directions. Why? Because we believe that if maps are rigged, legislative maps are rigged, it harms every voter. We have a wide range of coalition partners, but you may remember in 2015, in 2018, there were actually initiatives on the ballot to change the way we make state house maps in 2015, that passed by almost 72% of the vote. In 2018, the way we make congressional districts, that passed by almost 75% of the vote. And we'll get into a little bit as to what happened there. I have some slides in here that I don't think I'm gonna go through, but I kept them just in case in the question and answer it was helpful. So what I was gonna go through there is just how many times we tried to get to legislative redistricting reform. So our work actually started in the 1970s, where we were every round, every General Assembly, we were having legislation introduced. Maybe we would get a hearing, but we wouldn't get out of committee. We'd get out of committee, but not on the floor. We pass on one side, not the other, or we actually get on the ballot and it wouldn't pass. And so one of the things that we did in 2015 and 2018 was we actually finally worked with both parties, because in each of those instances, one party or the other, and there were equal opportunity in defeating our attempts for reform, we decided to try to compromise with both parties. But let's first talk about what legislative maps are. Let's keep in mind that after every census, we have to redo our congressional districts. We reapportion, which means every state looks at their portion of their population versus the population of the entire United States, and you get so many seats. So we now have 15 seats, we were 16 last decade, and then you have to redraw those lines. For the Ohio State House, the seats don't change for Ohio Senate or Ohio House, but again, we redraw those lines. Why? Because people are born, people move out of state, people pass away, people change, that they just move down the street, all of those things. And so we need to roughly have equal population for each legislative district. The thing that happens, and it is human instinct, which is why both parties do this, is if your party or your team has an advantage, you want to use that advantage to keep an advantage. So what they do is, and this again has happened all over the country, though Ohio has one of the worst histories possible for partisan gerrymandering, is you try everything you can, the party that's in power, so right now it's the Republicans, but again, both sides do this. So in Ohio, the party that's in power tries to pack as many Democrats as possible into as few of districts as possible. And then what happens if we are in a situation now, or we'll talk about last decade with Congress, where we had 16 seats, and the votes generally for congressional races, if you look at the last 10 years, generally is about 54% Republican, but Republican candidates were holding 75% of the seats. Because you can mathematically rig maps to really maximize seats for the majority party, minimize seats for the minority party. It's really a perfect example of gerrymandering, because even when the state went Obama, the seat share did not change. It's 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats. When the state went Trump, 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats. We should see, there will always be some seats that stay consistently one way or the other, right? You can think about parts of the state that are very conservative leaning or just very, very blue, and those might have seats like that stay the same. But you should have some that move around based on the preferences and behaviors of Ohioans, and all of us most of us probably split our ticket, right? Most of us kind of vote different ways. We are quite a swingable population. And so when you see 12-4 constantly, no matter what, you know that that map has been rigged. But here's why I say it was rigged for Republican candidates and not Republican voters. Because when a candidate wins their seat and they know that mathematically they will win it each time because of the letter behind their name, they don't have to listen to us. They are immune, actually, when maps are rigged, they are immune to the input of voters. And that's why we care about this as the League of Women Voters, as the nonpartisan advocates. And so what we've seen over the last many decades, and this will make sense to you, is that as partisan gerrymandering has gotten more extreme across the country, so has the partisan polarization in Congress and state houses across the country. Why? Because a candidate, if you know that it's just the letter behind your name as to whether you're gonna win your seat or not, then you have to play to your primary voter, not the general voter. So it's fueling these extremes, right? And then it doesn't matter, as long as you won your primary, you win. So some things that we've seen, as the more gerrymandering happens, we see less crossover votes in Congress on things like gun safety, healthcare, reproductive choice. Most of us are probably not these extremes. I'll give choice as an example. Every abortion is okay, absolutely no abortion is okay, right? Most of us are not these extremes. We're somewhere in the middle, but we're not seeing that kind of work across the aisle or that kind of nuanced look at policymaking. Why? Because they're playing to their big donors, they're playing to their primary voter. Make sense? So we're driving partisan gerrymandering. It has a whole bunch of other things. Last decade, and in fact, right now, since we don't have we're still under the current congressional district of 16 seats, 3.5 million Ohioans lived closer to a congressional district office that was not theirs. When you get all of these sprawling lines and weird shapes to try to manipulate maps, literally there are people that have to drive an hour if they wanted to go visit their congressperson, drive an hour, but they have another congressional district that's 10 minutes away. There's all kinds of confusion that happens with that. You may remember the special election Congressional District 12, actually the Franklin County Board of Election had to know that they had put thousands of Central Ohio voters in the wrong district for several cycles because the lines were so confusing. There's a spot in not too far from here, just south of here, where if you go one block in one direction, you're in 12, one block in another direction, you're in Congressional District 3, one block in another direction, you're in Congressional District 15. It's not just hard for voters, which is very hard for voters to figure out who represents them. It's hard for boards of elections when these lines are so rigged. So that's why we worked so hard with the Republican and Democratic Party for reforms. We negotiated a lot. I'll be honest, what we wanted was what's called an independent commission. We wanted not politicians. We wanted balanced numbers or approximate balance of Republicans, Democrats, and independents, potentially even, or experts. We wanted an independent commission, which means it wouldn't be politicians. We couldn't get there. But we were hopeful in this process in our negotiations that we would finally curb gerrymandering. We had all these rules about not splitting communities. A big rule about proportional fairness, which is, again, this idea that if about 54% of the vote goes Republican, about 54% of the seats should go Republican, that we would see some sort of parity there, if you will. And so we had all these different rules about transparency. And then the pandemic happened and census numbers were delayed. And then that was used as an excuse to not start hearings early, where we talked about things like, what software are we going to use? Or how are we going to measure proportional fairness? Or how are we going to weight data from past election cycles to know if these maps are fair? Or a whole bunch of things, right? We didn't have those hearings. We begged for those hearings for a long time to happen before we got the census data. The first hearings didn't happen until after we had it in hand. We should have gotten the census data in March of 21. We got it in about August, at the end of August of 21. And then every twist and turn, we had a situation where deadlines were blown. It was clear that most of the conversations with mapping were happening behind closed doors, that the parties were not working together. And just that, to be honest, and this hurts me to say it, when probably a lot of you voted for these reforms and we worked really hard on them, it was more like business as usual. It's almost like the Ohio Constitution wasn't changed in 2015 and 2018. Everything remained, all the excuses that they used for not being able to make maps that really responded to voters' change in preference were the excuses they used 10 years ago. All the kinds of tactics they used, they really just completely ignored us. And this was pretty heartbreaking. So you probably heard that we went to the Ohio Supreme Court. So one of the things about those reforms was that not only were these rules about how the maps were made transparent and public, there were rules about how the maps had to behave, like that proportional fairness. And that doesn't mean an exact 54% of seats, right? It just means about that range. None of those, so we definitely know that the meetings were generally not public. The decisions were still being made behind closed doors, and it was not bipartisan. And then the resulting maps still resulted in super majorities that by no means would respond. So if we ran this, if people voted the exact same way for the last decade on the maps that they produced, it would be well over 60% of the seats. We still ended up with these super majorities. And so we sued the Ohio Supreme Court. The people of Ohio, when we changed the Ohio Constitution, we gave the job of accountability to the Ohio Supreme Court, and so we sued. And this has been the biggest, Ohio has been really a shock to the entire country, because the Ohio Supreme Court keeps saying, no, these maps aren't good enough, and the Ohio Redistricting Commission keeps doing the same thing. So we've now had, we just yesterday had another ruling from the Ohio Supreme Court. So now this is be the third time that the congressional map needs to be redrawn. So it's been declared unconstitutional twice. And the state house maps have been declared unconstitutional 4 times. So we're actually in a situation where the Redistricting Commission is basically refusing to honor the role of the Ohio Supreme Court. Something that I mean, we saw it in school funding. I didn't think we would see it here. And this has been very heartbreaking and very scary, to be honest, because all the rules of government in terms of how we respect the branches and balance of power and all of those kinds of things seems to be completely out the window now. And I think it means that we have to think about it differently in terms of going forward. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about our campaign first, because I'm proud of what we did. Because what we did at Fair Districts and at the League of Women Voters is we thought it was the people of Ohio who demanded that change happen. It would be the people of Ohio that now demanded that this group of politicians actually put voters first when they make maps. So the first thing we did was relentless grassroots activism. We sent tens of thousands of cards to the Ohio General Assembly and the redistricting commissioners, We literally activated 50,000 people across the state asking for fair maps. We shut down phone lines asking for fair maps. We had people from nearly every county in the state, just like both of these reforms passed overwhelmingly in all 88 counties. We had people of all party affiliations and ages come to the State House, come to public hearings. You can see, these are pictures from the public hearings. So a year ago at this time, the commission gave us less than a week's notice for 10 hearings across the state during the day, often with bad parking. And I think they thought no one would show up. And actually the opposite happened. We trained our folks. We didn't give them talking points. We actually trained our folks on how to make their own testimony on how legislative maps have affected their lives and what they wanted. And we filled every hearing room. They actually had to go to overflow rooms in almost every single case. The Toledo hearing room, they moved to a larger space and it still wasn't big enough. There was one location where people were sitting on the floor because they had pulled out all the extra seats and then still didn't have any more seats. One of the locations, here's the thing about the redistricting commission, they didn't even build in enough time from the official end of a hearing till the beginning of the next for the commissioners to drive because they thought that's how few people were going to show. And so the Mansfield hearing had to start late because the Akron hearing went well past the time. And so at every twist and turn, we brought out our people, and that continued not just in August, but through every hearing we've had at the State House. We also did community maps and a mapping competition. And so the community map concept was that maybe the idea of making an entire district plan, 15 congressional districts, or 99 House districts, maybe that was too much, but we trained a whole bunch of volunteers to sit with communities, either in person or online, and say, okay, Grandview, where is Grandview? You know, should that map your community with this idea that communities should be kept whole? Because the way that you gerrymander is slicing and dicing communities and putting very different communities with each other, right? So in this last decade, for the first time ever, parts of Ohio State University and parts of OU were in the same congressional districts, right? Rather than keeping Athens whole, keeping all of the university districts whole. So we did this thing called community mapping. We submitted hundreds of community maps to the official mappers for them to think about as building blocks. We also had a mapping competition, which we did 10 years ago as well. And we had college professors, we actually had former Republican and Democrat lawmakers, we had various community organizations, faith leaders, NAACP, all these different groups come together and judge them. And we actually awarded, we gave awards for winning maps that were completely constitutionally compliant and much more fair than anything we've gotten here. And we submitted those to the state to be considered. When the commission started saying that it was impossible to follow the Constitution, we actually put those mappers, they got their own special button that said, I made a fair map, which is kind of like our Fair Districts logo to kind of make that point. One of the things we were frustrated with during the commission hearings is we wanted to see a map and then be able to pull it up on a screen, which they were never up on a screen. Most of the time you're looking at a PDF, which is impossible. If you're talking about the fine lines between, what do we do between Worthington and Dublin, right? You can't look at a PDF and know. But we actually modeled how we thought that should happen. Our mapping winners took feedback from other supporters and then redid their maps and resubmitted them, right? Like we tried to, every different way we possibly could, we tried to model what it might look like. And the league alone had more than 3,000 media hits in just a couple months' time. So we actually had national CBS News here. We had National Fox News here. We were in the New York Times and Washington Post, but what I think is more important is we were in all these little tiny community papers all over the state. Why? Because we think our job at League is to demystify how government works so that people can participate. And when you can get the media to cover stories, that's another way of demystifying that, right? Getting to the folks with the, you know, the TV station from Lima or the Norwalk newspaper, whatever it is. And so we also did a ton of social media, a ton of earned media, just to try to get folks involved. And we took all these testimonials. This was one of our social media pitches, was just to have all these folks, we had thousands of people send in their quotes and really fun pictures. You'll see that's even a Fair District's mask. That's how visible we try to be, because we knew like a lot of people might not feel comfortable testifying, right? But we wanted the mappers to know where they stood. And so we had buttons, we had t-shirts, we had masks, we had just about everything you could think of. We even put billboards in Lima, since the two main leaders of the General Assembly are both from Lima. We had billboards in Lima. We had events in Lima with pastors. Just about anything we could think of, we tried to do. And at this point, what I can tell you is that we're moving forward with maps. Hang on, let me see if I have it. This fall, and right now we're actually voting on state, you know, there's a state house primary, which not very many people are showing up to, please do that. This fall, we are technically voting on maps that the Ohio Supreme Court declared unconstitutional. That's pretty heartbreaking. The one thing I just kind of want to share with you is these are before and after our lawsuits. So if you see, we're getting a lot closer. In fact, you could argue, they're much better. You could argue for the state legislative, you could say, well, isn't that about 54%? Here's the problem with that. Within that 54%, a whole bunch of those Republican seats are like super secure. They're at least 55 to 60% of the vote. They're super secure that they're going to go that way. A whole bunch of those that are called Democrat seats are like razor thin margins. So it's still a preference, it's still an unfair preference inside of something. And this is why in our lawsuits, we actually use so many different kinds of data, not just proportional, this kind of proportionality, but we look at something called the efficiency gap, which is the idea that every vote should be equal in power 1-to-1, right? And it's super complicated and dorky, and I know there's some engineering types in here who would probably understand it, you know, but the idea being that you would have about equal power for each vote. Even in the maps that we're going into now with the State House, it's about a 13% gap, which means that Democrat votes in the Ohio General Assembly for Ohio General Assembly races statewide carry about 13% less power. Shouldn't be that way. That's again because of the way we have rigged these districts as a state. But this is where we are. The good news is they're not as extreme as they could have been without intervention from the Ohio Supreme Court. The confusing part, but hopeful part, is that actually both cases are still before the Ohio Supreme Court. So yesterday, the Ohio Supreme Court said that the state needed to make new maps before the 2024 election. So this is going to confuse the heck out of people, because we might actually have new maps this year, but we can't redo, we don't have time to do another primary, unfortunately. So there will have to be another attempt at this before 2024. And then on the State House side, we're expecting the Supreme Court to say the same thing, because actually what they implemented was nearly identical. The fifth map that they implemented was nearly identical to the third map that the Ohio Supreme Court deemed unconstitutional. partisan gerrymanders. So we expect the Ohio Supreme Court to knock that one down too. And then I guess you gotta ask, what's the definition of insanity, right? Because what keeps happening is the Supreme Court says, no, it's not good enough, and then the same mappers go, the same humans, same party players are directing this, and we continue to have partisan gerrymandering.
Well, isn't that the strategy? Just kind of delay.
I think that definitely part of the strategy, and he just asked in case those at home couldn't hear, part of the strategy is delay, and that's what we saw from the very beginning, right? And then it would be, well, we don't have time to have all these hearings and all this input line for line, because we gotta get going, right? But then, the Supreme Court would give them a new deadline and they would wait, maybe it was, let's just pretend it was a month, and they'd wait till week 3 to even start hearings. We don't have time, so so there is this whole kind of gamemanship that's happening with timing that's completely unfair. And so we've started to look at other states. Well, first, let me say this is an interesting quote. This is from the first win that we had, and from the findings, Chief Justice O'Connor says something really interesting, which is that having it comprised of elected officials and partisan legislators, they seem to be unwilling to put aside their partisan concerns. And so she starts to look at this idea of having a truly independent, nonpartisan commission. Yeah.
Can you speak to the makeup of the current commission?
Sure.
Not necessarily by name, but like,
Yeah.
so many bald guys and so many people driving red cars, or?
Yeah, that's good. I think there probably are some bald guys who drive red cars, but I'm not sure on the red car part. But what I'll say is, so the current commission is actually 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And the reason is because you have 3 statewides, and then you have so first off, the way Ohio generally goes is the way the governor goes is the way the rest of the statewides, like Secretary of State and Auditor, go. So it's not unusual that the 3 statewides are probably always going to be the same party, Republican or Democrat. We didn't like that. Just want you to know, like as we were negotiating, we weren't a big fan of that because we saw that we were going to have a problem with party parity. But then the head of the Republican Ohio House and Republican Ohio Senate caucuses, as well as the Democratic Ohio House and Democratic Ohio Senate caucus, were allowed to pick folks. So that's where you get 2 Democrats, right? 2 minority party legislative designees, 2 majority party legislative designees. So there's your 2 and 2 in terms of Republicans and Democrats. And then you have the statewide. And so the thing that's been interesting when you talk to the general public about it, so first off, they're tired of the whole thing, right? No one can keep track as to how many times, what map we're on, or how many times. I mean, I can barely keep track, and I'm the plaintiff in these. But the other 2 things that they say is, well, if it's that out of balance in terms of party control, and they say politicians are going to be politicians. And I think we had hoped, because both parties had negotiated on this, that better angels would prevail, right? We wanted to just bring something to the people. We wanted to finally win and bring some sort of reform. And so that was our hope. What I'll say is this: I don't think the reforms have failed. I think the commission has failed to uphold those reforms and respect the Ohio Supreme Court. But it's interesting to hear outgoing Maureen O'Connor look at this idea of an independent commission. And so we've been studying 4 of these as our next step. So we've got multiple next steps. First next step is make sure everyone votes. Okay, I don't care how folks vote. Let's just get them to the ballot box. Regardless, they're going to feel like it doesn't matter, right? Potentially, because they're going to hear all these things. Maybe they already think it doesn't matter, but we have everything from the governor to local judges on our ballot this November. So let's make sure everyone votes. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to continue our lawsuits, but we are looking at future reforms, which is going to be not an easy task. There are 4 states we're looking at that have independent, which means not sitting politicians, and insulated, which means that the legislature or governor can't just veto what the mapping body does. And are balanced. You see some are big, some are little. 2-2-1 for Arizona means two Republicans, Democrats, and 1 independent. 5-5-4 is again the 2 majority parties independent. Michigan is the one that we're kind of most interested in, just because it's, you know, we like them except for one week of the year, I think, because we're combined. Our economies are really, you know, linked. But this is the kind of thing that we're looking at now. Is there will be some sort of criteria. The other thing that's interesting about Michigan is not only can they not be sitting politicians, they're not allowed to run for office for a while. So the idea being that it takes away this temptation of just trying to make districts for yourself or your friends, right? And instead, they just are really trying to look at the map themselves. I could, again, bring out those efficiency scores, and I don't have them here, but what I'll say is this: they're far more partisan fair. The 1-to-1 kind of power of Republican Democrat votes is very close to equal, if not equal. Any way that we would measure, any sort of scientific measuring, even compactness, so how small the districts are versus sprawling, so there's no Ohio State and OU being put together kind of thing, all of these different scores out of these 4 states are better than ours. And there are rules about mapping, the transparency, the publicness, all those kinds of things, as well as these other rules about keeping communities whole. Those are very similar in their constitutions to ours. The difference is who's making the map. And this is why we're looking at this now. Yeah.
So is another part of the strategy relate to the Supreme Court election, since the Supreme Court Justice O'Connor is the one that's screwing up the Republicans right now by voting against the map. And so just wait, we'll get her out there, and then the Supreme Court will say it's okay.
Yeah, that is one of the strategies. So you have Maureen O'Connor crossing to and you could say she sided with Democrats. I don't think that's right. I think she sided with the Constitution and voters, but she is, you know, the Chief Justice Republican, and then you have the minority party, the Democrat justices, all of this 4-3 vote. Absolutely, that's part of the strategy, would be to wait for her to go. I think one of the things that's interesting about Maureen O'Connor, and she's certainly conservative in a lot of her opinions, but I think she's always been an independent thinker, and she's on her way out, so she has some room. This goes back to that politician piece, right? She's aged out, she's not gonna run again. She has some room to go against her party and various political operatives or donors, whoever. And that's what we're not seeing otherwise. And so we don't endorse candidates or parties, but of course we are encouraging everyone to make sure they do their research and vote for judges. One of the things I'll tell you that always concerns me is that judicial races are the most likely for folks to skip. There's studied this over and over and over again, and part of it is because folks don't understand how coursework. Part of it is that, like, judges, you can't ask the same questions, right? They're not really gonna give you and should not give you a direct answer about some of the hot button topics like guns or something. And so voters feel like they don't know what they do, they feel like they don't have information on the candidates, and they skip them. And whether it's cases like this, determining how our legislative lines are, all the way to, are you gonna show up in front of this person and come and please, judges affect our daily lives. And so I would say that's one thing I'd love for you to just help do, is make sure that the folks in your life are not skipping those races. Because in some ways, they affect us more directly than a lot of the other candidates on the ballot. Yeah.
Can you speak at all to how the folks in Michigan were able to affect a partial remedy in terms of process?
So I think it's interesting because we were earlier than Michigan in terms of getting on the ballot and winning. But they did something similar. They had citizen petition drives like we did and would have. And they had a large coalition like we did to get these things passed. That was bipartisan. They did not necessarily have support from both parties, but they were able to get there. It took a long time. Every state that has a functioning, independent, insulated commission, they failed a lot first. And to be honest, Michigan's not as inexpensive as a state for ballot initiatives as Ohio. It's not as complicated as a state for ballot initiatives. To be honest, to get on the ballot and win with something that politicians wouldn't like, probably a $25 to $30 million endeavor. It was probably, I don't know what it was in Michigan, but it wasn't that high. So it doesn't mean we're not treating ballots of violets that we never stop. We're not gonna stop until we get this done. But we would be looking at their campaign. And we're not just looking at the policy pieces of this, we're also, doing polling, research on how people feel about things, which the two things that keep coming up is politicians will be politicians and things need to be balanced or it's just not gonna work, right? And so we think that that piece helps. Another interesting thing about Ohio in terms of polling is Ohio voters score off the charts in thinking that government is corrupt. Which to me is really interesting and very sad, right? And probably fuels some of the reasons why we have low turnout rates sometimes or different things, but we're looking at some of those pieces as well. But this is why it's like many steps at once, right? We get slightly better maps this round for this election, keep working through the Supreme Court and see where that takes us. But also at the same time, look to see if we can make long-term change this decade. Yeah.
The one thing that kind of confuses me is the court continues to rule in the same way without any consequences for their ruling.
Right.
And part of my view is why doesn't one party lose a seat on the commission just for having put in such a blast?
Yeah, so he's talking, and in case people didn't hear, he's saying, the court keeps ruling, there's no consequences for the commissioners. Why can't the party that continues to not respect the Supreme Court, lose a commission? Why aren't there consequences? And I think this is what's fascinating and disturbing to me, is that those that were hell-bent on rigging maps have maximized the weakness of various branches and of government. They recognize that the Ohio Supreme Court doesn't have the teeth it should have. So that's another marching order for the league and voters across the state, is to figure out how we give the Supreme Court teeth, not just on this, but anything, right? If you think about the school funding, how long ago has the school funding been declared unconstitutional, and we still haven't really cracked that nut, right? So, hi, oh, there we go.
So, wow, I think it's going out.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but anyway, I think that's a fair question. We need to look at that, right? There's a lot of different pieces and parts here that we need to look at in the long term. But if we go back to the ballot box, trust and believe, we will have something in there to strengthen that accountability.
I'm a parent, and I know no consequence means it's not a rule.
Right. So those at home, he said, if the no consequence, there's no rule. It's true. It's true. Implied control never works, right? I just wanted to make sure you knew about some of the other things we do. So two of our big priorities now is just getting folks the information they need to vote. So vote411.org is our nonpartisan voter guide to show you how serious we take our neutrality when we're serving voters. When our own issues on gerrymandering in 2015 and 2018 were on the ballot, Vote 411 had the pros and cons. We said that we supported it, but we actually also put the cons in there. We're very serious about trying to be fair in our information and neutral in the information we give to voters. Election protection is a hotline that literally anyone can just call if they're confused. They can't find their polling location. They don't know what ID they need. Maybe they got turned away. Maybe their absentee ballot request was denied because of a signature. They can call and they'll get assistance. But if it turns into something where it's actually a violation of voting rights, we intervene on that. So for example, in 2020, there was a couple times that people who were COVID positive, they didn't know they were going to be COVID positive, but they are COVID positive on election day. They drive up and they were denied their ballots. There are ways, just like you can test someone safely from a car, you can hand a ballot to someone. That was me personally intervening with the Secretary of State to make sure those individuals had the access to the ballot. So the boards of elections, 2 different boards of elections, one urban, one rural, one in the southern part of the state, one in the northern part of the state, both like within the last 20 minutes of election day, got to the Secretary of State, who called those boards of elections, who called those voters and had them come back and vote. And so these are the kinds of things we do. We're also a membership organization. If you want to, Cheryl Roller, I mean, this is a very incredible organization in terms of I'm state level, so I think state policy, I think state action. At the local level, registering voters, doing those candidate forums so that voters aren't just hearing from candidates in a campaign ad, but actually are answering directly questions that voters need to know. All those kinds of things is the local league does. And again, men and women of all party proclivities are welcome and to be part of our organization. So.
I think we've got time for a question if anybody has one. I think we've kind of peppered it through. Does anybody online have any questions? Well, great. Thank you very much. All right, note to myself to get batteries. So next week, we're going to have a presentation by me again, right? And so I'm going to talk about what is a companion club, the who's, what's, where's, why's, and how's, so that everybody has an opportunity to know why it is the smartest decision our club can make this year. So please make sure you're here next week. All right, we have a raffle.
Yes, we do. And I mixed them up really good. And keep in mind, so the-
501 250.
250. How much is in it?
Sure, that'd be me.
Yeah.
11 bucks.
Which is much better than 8 2 weeks ago. Yes. And what we got, 48 in the semi-big top. Mr. Farmer, you'd be so kind.
48 in the ace of spades.
You got your glasses on.
501 228.
228. What's going on here? I've seen you pull this too many times.
Well, no, you pull it for yourself. I'll pull it for you.
And I'm gonna grab that fine spot.
All these wires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
You won.
It's official. Starting it over. All right. Okay, so as is customary, if you would rise and join me in the recitation of the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First.
Is it true?
The truth.
Second.
Fair to all concerned.
Third.
Build goodwill and better friendships.
And fourth. Will be beneficial
Beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, I am. You were on.